podcast that you're listening to is being presented to you with the cooperation of the SJ Network. If you're a person who needs a publicist and you want to appear on podcasts, contact Stephen Joyner at s-j-network.com. Let's get on with the show.
Today's guest, filmmaker Bryan Parkerson, is the host of The Other Interview Show.
Wait a minute, I'm confused. I thought that this was The Other Interview Show.
No, this is the other Interview Show, the one with the untalented host.
Right. The untalented host who also underpays his voice-over bots.
And he also writes awful jokes. I hope that clears everything up.
Definitely. At least we won't make fun of him in the show intro. This will be our little secret.
Attention, rebels of the Sherpalution. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. We would like to give you a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial, simply by heading to www.audibletrial.com/Sherpa. There are over 180,000 titles of audiobooks and podcasts, including this one, to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. And now, the one and only Mr. Bruce will lead you into the Sherpa Chalet. As a reminder, you can only bring one mountain lion at a time on the elevator.
Welcome to Too Many Podcasts, the podcast about podcasts. Now, podcasting from the Sherpa Chalet on Mount Podcastia, here's your host, Jim, the podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, Rebels, and welcome to Too Many Podcasts. It is the podcast about podcasts and so much more. And you know who I am. I'm Jim, the podcast Sherpa, your personal Sherpa, leading you through the mountains of Podcastia so we can check out a whole bunch of podcasts. And we've arrived at one today with a great interview with our guest today.
Who's our guest today, Sherpa?
His name is Bryan Parkerson. He's down in Tennessee, and he is the host of the podcast, The Other Interview Show. No, not that other interview show, The Other Interview Show. And Bryan is not only a film lover, he is a filmmaker as well, and you can hear his passion for watching films just as high as the level as it is at making films. So we had a wonderful conversation, and I got to talk to Mike White a while back, if you recall, of the projection booth. And wouldn't it be great to have those two guys do a conversation together? It might happen. It might happen, Rebels. Just keep your ears open. I don't know when it'll happen, but it'll happen. But anyway, after we're done talking to Bryan, you know what? I'm going to throw an 80s musical reference at you. She blinded me with podcasts. Yes, that's right. You'll know what I'm talking about right after this interview with Mr. Bryan Parkerson of The Other Interview Show. Hello there, Rebels. We are here in the other interview room because we are speaking to the host of The Other Interview Show, and his name is Bryan Parkerson, coming to us from Tennessee. And he's also a filmmaker and as well as a podcaster. We're going to get to know him and know all about his show, and he's right here. And I will stop talking and say, Bryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, sir. It's good to be on, man. Thanks for having me.
So I guess we can probably jump right off the bat with the filmmaking. Now, a lot of your podcasts actually are interviews with other filmmakers as well, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So how did you get into filmmaking?
It really started with getting old. I'm nearing 40, and I've got a career that I have, and I don't know. It's weird, man. I turned 36, and some kind of switch flipped in my mind, and I realized I wasn't happy doing what I was doing. And so I began, and what was funny is I just started back to school. I was working on a degree in cybersecurity, and something just completely, I was like, I don't like doing this anymore. I don't enjoy this. And I started doing some self-discovery, introspective thinking, and I knew that I wanted to do something creative. I never really tapped my creative side professionally, but I knew I wanted to do something creative, but I wasn't sure what. Do I want to do marketing? Do I want to do, graphic design of some kind? Like, I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And one thing I was sure about is I'd always wanted to start a podcast. So I, back in the late 80s, mid to late 80s, there was a show on the movie channel called Joe Bob's Drive-In Theater.
Sure.
And
Joe Bob Briggs.
Yeah. I discovered him on I used to watch Monster Vision as a kid on TNT. That was the second show he did. That I think he joined the show in like 94 and took over as host. Or 94, 97. I think it was 94. But I had completely forgotten about Monster Vision, and I randomly ran across it on YouTube. And it was just nostalgia central for me. So I just started watching all these Joe Bob clips. Well, come to find out, his real name's John Bloom. John is on Cameo. So I started sending these Cameo messages, and I found myself wanting to talk to him about who he was as a person, more so than his career. And I was sitting at my desk on a Friday night, and I realized that's my show. Why don't I interview people? I love horror films. So I was like, why don't I interview actors, authors, and directors in horror? And I focus on who they are as people and not only their careers. So I bounced the idea off of an author, Twitter friend, who's kind of a bigger author. And he liked the idea and encouraged me to pursue it. And he got me in contact with my friend, Matt. And Matt helped me Matt's an author as well. And Matt helped me get my podcast started. And I became really good friends in the process. And he's got a show called Grindcast that he does. He's been doing it for about 7 years. And he's a really great author, really great guy. And I just started reaching out to people. And actually, funnily enough, one of the people I reached out to was Honey Gregory, the original Mail Girl. And she and I have just become really good friends. I was actually just talking to her before I got jumped on with you. I was on the phone with her. She actually is in my movie that I just made, or that I'm in the process of making. Yeah, she's in Blood Repentance. We'll talk about it. But I knew I still was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. So my first guest was a guy named Harrison Smith, and Harrison's a filmmaker, and he is a movie genius. I mean, he'll tell you about directors and movies you have never heard of. I mean, like you think you know film, then you talk to Harrison, you realize you know nothing of film, you know? And so I just was really fascinated by it. And I really enjoyed talking to him. It was like a 2.5 hour conversation. Loved talking to him. Then I interviewed my friend, we weren't friends at the time, but we've become friends since the interview, my friend Hilton Ariel Ruiz. And I think it was after talking to Hilton, I realized I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker by the time I at some point I knew I wanted to do film. I knew by December that's what I wanted to do. I can't remember what it was that was like, that's what I want to do. But I know, because now that I think about it, I remember I was really wanting to connect with Harrison and kind of get a mentor. I needed a mentor to help me kind of figure out what I was doing. And Hilton became that for me. And we just became friends. But I think that really started to further cement, like, this is what I wanted to do. Because in the process, when I started the podcast, I also started a production company called Dawn Journey Productions. And I did that as an umbrella to do all these ventures under. And I just kind of ran with it, man. And a friend of mine challenged me he wanted to see if I was serious about it, because I'd asked him to come on board my company. And he said, well, I want to see that you're serious about it. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to go out with your roommate, and I want you to make a 2-minute movie. Well, that 2-minute movie is actually turned into a full-fledged production called Blood Repentance. I've got a full cast. I've got crew. Like I said, Honey Gregory was in it in June. We're planning to have it released by November. So we're still in production on it now. But I mean, it became a thing, man. I mean, it became a professional, full-fledged production, with producers and executive producers. And it's been a really incredible experience. But the short answer to that question is, it was really, I think I just hit that phase of my life where I began to question what I was doing with my life. I chased the corporate ladder. I was a career guy, and I just realized this is not bringing me joy. This is not making me happy. And the funny thing is, through my podcast, I've been learning more about myself, because now I'm talking to all these actors and filmmakers and people that are in the industry. And every now and then they'll say something, and I'm like, yes, that's how I am. Like, they'll talk about how none of them wanted to work a 9-to-5 job. They couldn't bear, Larry Hankin, talking to Larry Hankin, he had talked about, the idea of having to go to a job every day you hate. He just couldn't bear that thought, Right. So, I mean, he does acting, he does comedy. Hilton had made the statement one time that, the 9-to-5 drains the soul of the artist, and then, Susan Lanier, when I interviewed her on the show, she had made a comment. I forget what it was she said, but she just said something that kind of further cemented to me, like, this is why I can't just work a 9-to-5 and turn it off and, go on my merry way. Like, that's just not how I'm wired as an artist, So, and I've just been going at it full blast, man. I mean, we're in production of Blood Repentance. I just finished a film for the Knoxville Film Festival that'll be premiering next month in theaters. I recently finished co-writing a film with my friend Steve Herman. It's called It Came From Somewhere. It's kind of a 50s sci-fi B movie. So Next month, I'm actually flying to Illinois for production of that. I'm going to be on set while they're filming that, and I'll probably have an extra part in the film as well. Oh goodness, I've got a couple of small producer roles in a couple of other films. I mean, I've just been going at it, hardcore, and I've got other ideas that, as I've been doing this and networking with people, I've kind of been building a small team of people that I want to do stuff with, and we're just gonna make movies, man. That's what we want to do.
When you got started, I mean, were you focused on acting or writing or directing, or you just wanted to kind of just dive into everything?
Writing, directing, and cinematography were my three things I wanted to focus on.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you said that you're doing little parts in the movies, though, if you can?
That's not my goal.
Okay.
I will. I mean, I kind of want to play around with acting. So in the film we just did for the film festival, I kind of have a starring role. It's hard to call it that because it's a 7-minute film, but I mean, it's a little bit of a starring role in it. I've got, next to the person that's the star of the film, I have the most lines.
Okay.
I think I have the most lines. Maybe Corey has most lines. I either have the second or third most lines in the film. I think it might be the second though. But at Blood or Pins, I don't have a part. I was originally going to act in it, but that was because I didn't have it really cast. It was just something I was doing with friends.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I've got it fully cast, I'm not in it. I'm just directing and doing the cinematography on it. But acting does appeal to me. I think it's fun. And it really, I kind of discovered that through doing the table reads. If one of the actors can't show up or, just for whatever reason, maybe I'm just going through the script with, one of my partners, Scott. We're both acting the parts. It's just a lot of fun to do it, so, but my three passions, my number one passion is directing. I like to direct up and I like creating. I like the writing part of it too. I'd say directing and writing are kind of at the top, and cinematography is a very close second. I see the benefit of just doing nothing but directing and let somebody else handle cinematography, but I also feel sort of like, how when you drive stick shift for a while and then you get into an automatic, it just doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel like you're driving. Like if I don't have the camera in front of me while I'm directing, it feels weird.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
No, it actually does. You know where your zone is, so you want to get yourself into it.
Because film is like painting, man. I mean, like when you're framing these shots, I mean, you have a vision, and your job as a director is to create that vision and to get the people, direct the people into doing what it is you need to do to have that vision created, right? Mm-hmm. You can take that a step further with the camera, though. Like you're creating scenes. You're an architect. You're really your frame is your canvas. And it's up to you what you want to put in it. When you're blocking, which is, the term for basically like choreographing and setting up scenes.
Right.
When you're doing the blocking, man, you're painting. I mean, that's essentially what you're doing is you're painting. Like it's just really cool to frame something up, and like just to think about it in your head. It's like, okay, I really like this. Like I found that I don't like head-on shots. I prefer kind of angled, like 45-degree angle. I like to frame things at a 45-degree angle. There's just something about it that's appealing to me. I've also been learning my style as a filmmaker. So like one of my partners, Jordan, and Lucas, two of my partners, I should say, they're more like guerrilla filmmakers. Like they do, a lot of dolly shots, and they do a lot of gimbal shots, and there's a lot of movement in their cinematography. I mean, you're constantly moving with them. I'm kind of old school. I'm more like George Romero. When George shot films, it wasn't really until his later movies. I think he had some pan shots in Dawn and Day of the Dead, but for the most part, his shots were stationary tripod shots. He filmed like a comic book, and he even talked about how comic books influenced his filmmaking. Mm-hmm. So I think growing up, being a George Romero fan and watching his movies, and I just really I really like and enjoy stationary shots. But in this venture, I've also learned the power of collaboration. And in collaborating with Lucas and Jordan, I've seen the effectiveness of these dolly shots, and these, I don't want movement in my shots without a purpose. Like I've seen situations where it's like, okay, let's get a pan shot of this. And my question is like, why? What are you communicating by panning across this? You don't always have to have movement in the shot, right? But then I turned around and I watched their work. They did their first movie was a feature, which is a bold thing to do. They did a feature called The Shape, and it's a Michael Myers fan film. And I got to tell you, man, I don't think there was a single stationary shot in the entire film, and it worked well. They created something really good. So I've learned in working with them I don't know. I mean, I know everybody has a style, but I never really thought about it. I never saw it in action. And then with collaborating with them, I've realized like I actually have a style. You know, I have this very old school kind of, I like either a still shot or a pan. You know, I'm very old school in that. Like I don't do a lot of the crazy stuff. But man, I'll tell you, they get really creative. I mean, some of the stuff I've seen them do with the camera, it's bold. You know, like this whip focus kind of thing. Like they'll start out. I don't know how he does it. Like, you know, Lucas will start out like you're out of focus and whoop, I mean, just real quick, you know, and we don't have a focus puller on set, man. Like we're not that fancy yet. We don't have a dedicated focus puller, right? You know, so I mean, I was watching this shot he did when we were editing the film for the film festival. I'm watching this shot and it starts out, I mean, it's real quick, but I happen to notice it's out of focus and then wham, just real quick, it's in focus. I'm thinking like, how in the world did you do that? But I noticed on his lens that he has on his camera, it looks like there's a button on the where the gear is to focus. Okay. So I think you can actually engage that and set a focus, and then it won't go past that. That's my guess. I don't know for sure because I'm still kind of new to cameras. But I think he probably hits a button and sets the focus there, and then unfocuses it, and then he can just real quick go to that spot on the lens. So it's been really cool. I'll tell any person out there wanting to be a filmmaker, collaborate. It's so much more fun. You get a better product out of it because they have such different style. It brings more of a flavor to my movies. You know, like, you know, when you have this amalgamation of traditional and modern, you know, I'll call it modern filmmaking, right? Because like, you know, gimbal shots and things like that. That's been a very recent thing. So it really brings a lot more flavor to what you're doing. And even in your script writing, don't be afraid to collaborate with your script. Don't be afraid of having other names on your screenplay. You know, you can say story by me, you know, but, you know, screenplay by myself, and, you know, who cares? If you have a better movie out of it, then why does it matter? You know? So I'm really all about collaboration, man. It's a lot of fun.
So those are interesting pointers. I usually don't get like pointers from movie directors, so I appreciate you bringing this out, Bryan. To one of the points that you made earlier, so I guess the manner in which you film kind of presents the mood of the movie too. It ends up doing it that way, would you say?
Yeah, very much. I mean, like your shot types can really tell a story, you know, okay. So for example, so you have high angle and low angle shots, okay? And the point of those shots is to communicate something. So typically with low angle shots, that is supposed to communicate dominance, or I'm sorry, submissiveness, right? So if I have a low angle, so let's say that I put the camera on the floor and I'm pointing up in let's say there's dialogue happening between two actors, okay? And so I do a scene where I'm on the floor and I'm doing a low angle shot of one of the actors. What I'm communicating with that shot is that this person is dominant in this conversation, okay? Mm-hmm. And he's looking down on the other person. Now, flip that and I do a high angle shot where I'm kind of higher than my actors or whatever it is I'm shooting, and I'm looking down. I'm communicating dominance in that shot. So the type of shots you have really, really can communicate something. Like, you know, another example, I was at my girlfriend's house this evening and we were watching Ted Lasso. I'd never seen it before. And in the very first episode, he's at this, Jason Sudeikis is at this press conference, and there's a kind of I'll call it a close-up, you know, medium close-up shot, borderline close-up shot of him, because you kind of see him from here up. So like a profile type thing. But I think they use some kind of like fisheye lens or something, because there's a bit of a curvature to the shot. But the way they did it, it really communicated to me like awkwardness and nervousness, you know, and these people are grilling him at this press conference. And I said to her, I was like, I wonder how they got that shot right there. And I think it was some kind of fisheye lens, but it wasn't so much the angle they shot at. It was the type, it was the lens they used with that kind of fisheye effect. It really communicated like this is a really awkward, uncomfortable situation for him. Mm-hmm. You know, like if you put some sweat on him, it would have made total sense. So yeah, your shot types and your lenses that you use can absolutely tell a story. You know, like I mean, if I framed you up a certain way, I can, you know, make you look nervous. I can make you look scared. You know, I can make it look like you're on drugs. You know, but maybe like doing some kind of like tunnel thing on you. Like mm-hmm. It's really amazing. I mean, it's painting. It's painting. It really is like painting. You know.
Now you said that you were a big horror kid. So are you classic horror or contemporary horror, or a little bit of both?
I don't necessarily have a preference. I mean, people would tell you that I'm biased to classic, but I've seen some great modern stuff. I mean, one of my favorite movies is Shaun of the Dead. That was from 2004. It's an Edgar Wright film, and love that movie. I was watching it today, actually. I've seen that movie so many times. I really love the more classic films. I'm really gaining an appreciation for older films as I get older. When I was a kid, I wasn't, outside of like Night of the Living Dead and certain other films, I wasn't real big on black and white. I wasn't really real big on the style of acting back then. But now, as I've gotten older, I really appreciate it. You know, I was watching, what was it? I watched a movie called Pork Chop Hill recently, and also that was from 1959, I believe. And I watched The Angry Red Planet again, and really enjoyed both of them. And what's really cool about older films, it's almost like a time capsule. If you really get into a movie, it's like you get to go back in time and live in that moment for a while. For an hour and a half, 2 hours, you get to be in 1959. I really, movies are magic. And I really hate that there's a business side to it almost, because that really, when you get into the business side of things, that really takes the magic away and it looks ugly. But when you remove the business part of it and you look at just the art itself, movies really are magical. Like if a person's having a bad day, what do they typically do? They come home and they watch a movie that they like, or they watch a show that they like. I would venture to say they probably watch something they've seen before, because there's a comfort to it.
Sure.
Because it's letting you escape reality and be somewhere else for a while. Now I question myself a little bit, because sometimes, like, some of the movies that bring me comfort, I'm like, I don't know why I find this comforting, but there's just like, I don't know what about the zombie apocalypse makes me feel better about any kind of situation, but like it's because one of my go-tos will be like Shaun of the Dead, or The Dead Don't Die, or something like, so the Dead Don't Die. It's a Jim Jarmusch film. Granted, it's a zombie apocalypse film. I think what it really appeals to me about it is that small town life. There's just something about the town of Centerville that it's just appealing to me. It's just like, people they're just in their own little world. It's just, there's something appealing about it. So it's just kind of fun to escape to Centerville until the zombies come out, and then it's not quite so fun. But I really believe movies are magical, and what's so cool about doing filmmaking is you get to peek behind the cape a little bit, and it's not disappointing. Like I imagine, if you were a magician learning all the tricks, it might be a little disappointing. Like maybe it robs the magic a little bit to know how they do things, but I don't feel that way. In fact, I've seen other filmmakers say that filmmaking ruined movies for them because they just can't watch a movie without being critical anymore. And did the total opposite for me. I have a greater appreciation for movies. Now when I watch a film, if I turn on that part of my brain, the filmmaking part. So for example, I look at the challenge. So Blood Repentance, it's been a challenging production. It's hard to coordinate, when everybody that you work with has a full-time job, a family, kids, it's hard to coordinate schedules. Right. So, I look at the challenges of making even a small production like Blood Repentance. And then I watched recently Tora, and I'm looking at these just amazing things they pulled off in this film with the carriers and the planes and the explosions. And I'm watching this movie, and my jaw was probably on the table, man, because I was, just from a filmmaking perspective, I was so blown away by what they did with this movie. And in my mind, I'm comparing that to how challenging the little thing that I'm doing is. Like I love watching movies from that perspective. Now it gives you it's giving me a greater appreciation of film and the art, and wow, how did they get that shot, or how did they get that effect? Like I was watching Ghostbusters last night. From the very beginning of the movie, if you remember, in the library, all the index cards start flying out of the drawer, right? My question was like, how did they do that? And then in Dana Barrett's apartment, the eggs are popping out and laying on the counter and cooking. And again, I'm asking myself, how in the world do they do that? So now, instead of, I'm watching the movie from a different perspective now. I'm like, and I'm watching, I'm like, oh, this was shot anamorphic. I didn't know that. And I looked at IMDb just to confirm, and lo and behold, yeah, they was shot anamorphic, because I could tell by the lens flares. It really has given me a greater appreciation for movies. I feel like I can watch movies now, and even bad ones, depending on how bad they are, I can really appreciate what they're doing,
Every once in a while, I think you need a bad movie to kind of check your brain at the door and be like, yeah, this is silly, but so what? It's
hard for me to see other filmmakers be hard on themselves about their project. I have a friend who did a very ambitious feature, and he's really hard on himself about it. And all I want to say to him is, like, look at what you accomplished for $2,000. He's got drone shot in it. He's got full cast and crew. He's shot at some really cool places. I'm like, man, you need to celebrate this. I understand you have a vision. If you can't 100% accomplish that vision for whatever reason, it's hard. But I want to encourage him to just celebrate this production. I mean, like, when you see this movie, he did it for $2,000. That he did an incredible thing for $2,000. Mm-hmm. It's hard. People don't understand how hard it is to make a movie. What they don't see is all the coordination and the planning and trying to get money. No movie's free. You got to have equipment. You got to feed your people. It takes time and sacrifice, and it's painful. But I'll tell you something, all the coordination, all the planning, all the stress that goes into getting a production together, getting your actors together, that first day you're on set, it's just like, I remember the first day of shooting for Bloater Pins, I was at location, and I kept saying to Scott, who's my AD, and he's one of my business partners, I kept saying, like, Scott, we're making a movie, man. And I just remember, getting on Facebook and talking about, this is the greatest day of my life, because I'm on a movie set right now, man. A script that I wrote is now being filmed. I have people here playing the parts that I wrote. Like, I'm watching my script come to life.
Sure.
And I'm yelling, action, cut, great, let's do it again. Like, I'm framing up shots. I mean, like, it was magic. It was the coolest feeling in the world. And I want everybody to have that. I mean, it's awesome. It really is magical. It really is. Like, any person out there who wants to get in the film, just get out there and do it. Just do it. Even if you have just your phone and a couple of your friends, man, make the best daggum movie you can make, and get it out there. And what you're going to find is, if you're ambitious enough and if you're passionate enough, you're going to start having a lot of people want to work with you, and the other stuff will come,
Could you talk a little bit about the competition that we were talking about before we started recording?
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about it. The Knoxville Film Festival goes on every year, and they have a couple different contests in it. And one of the contests is called the 7-Day Shootout. Essentially, what you do, they have a kickoff. You draw a random number, and that number determines what genre you get. And you have 7 days to write, cast, film, edit, get in the can a 4 to 7 minute film. There's certain guidelines you have to follow. And then you have to have 3 elements in it as well. So there'll be 3 things that you have to have in the film as well, on top of the genre that you get. It is intense. I mean, like, you think, okay, 4 to 7 minutes, it's easy. I can do that in an hour. No, you can't. That shoot, Jordan and Lucas got on set at like 10 a.m. I got to set probably about 11:30. We were there till after 10 o'clock that night. Filming for what ultimately is a 7-minute film. I think we came in at 6 minutes, 59 seconds and 14 milliseconds. So but then that took almost 12 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. It's time consuming, cause you're getting the lighting right. You're moving the camera, you're directing the actors, you're changing locations, you got to stop to eat. People got to go to the bathroom, chit chat happens, like, cause you don't, unless you're on like a really strict schedule and there's money in play, you don't want to be an iron dictator on set, man. Like, nobody's going to want to work you. I mean, you got to have a relaxed family environment. It's important that you get along with everybody. It's important that people feel welcomed and relaxed and they're having fun. Cause it is fun. I mean, honestly, you're making a movie. I mean, how cool is that, right? So you don't want to create an environment that's not conducive of that feeling. When people are on set with me, you're making a movie, and I want to feel like you're making a movie. I want you to have fun. You're family. When you're working with me, you're family, and I'm going to treat you that way. But it was intense, man. I mean, it was, getting 3 hours of sleep one night and getting up and going to work the next day, and then that night going back, and editing and staying up till 1 or 2 a.m. the next, that night too, so I could get the thing exported and submitted. But it's done, and we did it. And, we're premiering, our film will be played on the big screen, next month. So that's exciting.
Sure.
It's really exciting.
Now, Bryan, you said earlier that you really got the idea to do podcasting and how you wanted to approach it with getting to know a lot of these filmmakers as people. And I probably like an insight into their creative processes as well as understanding them. Mm-hmm. Were there any special guests that really kind of stuck out in your mind?
I would say one of the most special episodes I've had, I haven't released it yet. George Romero had a big impact on my life. I saw Night of the Living Dead as a kid, and I fell in love with the movie. I don't know what it was about it, because I had seen The Lost Boys and Howling and the Howling and American Werewolf Alone. I've seen all these movies as a kid, better or worse. I saw them as a kid, whatever. Mm-hmm. That movie, for whatever reason, stuck with me and resonated with me. And I fell in love with zombies. That was my favorite genre, still is my favorite genre. And when I was a teenager, when I was about 13, I discovered, I didn't know that George had done another film. I didn't know he had done Dawn of the Dead. And I didn't know he had done Day of the Dead. So I went on this journey to see Dawn of the Dead. I mean, being a 12-year-old kid, in the mid 90s or the late 90s, it was 1997. So being a 12-year-old kid in 1997, when YouTube doesn't exist, and, it's, how do I see this movie? And it took me about a year. So I think I was 13 when I finally saw it. And it was the greatest movie I'd ever seen. And to this day, 23 years later, my favorite movie is Dawn of the Dead. And I don't think anything will ever crown it. Like, I just don't think the only movie that came remotely close was the Queen biopic, because I'm a big Queen fan.
Okay.
But I don't, it was too inaccurate. I'm one of those people. I was kind of pedantic about it. Like, I was like, this is not right. The history's wrong on this, but Dawn of the Dead's always been my favorite film. So I would say the most special thing was getting to interview Scott Reiniger. I reached out to him and got a hold of him, and he agreed to come on the show. And I remember the day I got the message back from him that he was going to do an interview with me, I was pacing around my house. I don't know how long. And I was calling people, like when I get really energetic, I'm very much an extrovert. So like I thrive on people. Mm-hmm. Like I thrive on just being around people and just talking to people and building relationships. And I was calling people. I was calling my mom, and I was calling like my grandmother and all these people, just my aunt. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to believe this. I'm going to interview one of the stars of Dawn of the Dead, because it's my favorite movie, So getting to talk to him, when you talk to, especially when you're in filmmaker mode, you can't fanboy out on your actors. Like, it creates a bridge. They don't see you as a peer any longer. They see you as a fan. Right. And they go in a different mindset that way. That's not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with being a fan. But when you're making movies, you can't treat your talent that way. You have to turn it off. So I couldn't do that with Scott Reiniger. Just couldn't. I was getting to be in the universe of this favorite film of mine for 23 years. I had to tell him what it meant to me, And he was really humble about it. And he was a really nice guy. And what I loved about talking to him, Scott is very much a man who appreciates the art of film and the art of acting. He talked about the difference in the way society sees those things. And, here and in Europe, in Europe, theater is still huge. Theater is a big thing. And he said people there, they don't care about your celebrity. They care about the art of acting. It's like, here people are more concerned with like, well, how famous are you? One of my favorite memories from that podcast actually is I was asking about his favorite films, and he would stop and he would just kind of lean back for a second. He looked up in the air, and I could tell in his mind, he was going back to like 1969 or 1973, whatever year it was. He was going, and up here, he was in a theater again back then, watching this film for the first time. And it's just something really cool about watching that, and then he would carefully answer the question. He talked about, the cinematography he liked, this director he liked. Every filmmaker I've gotten to talk to, it's a privilege, because it's not just that I'm talking to these people who might be famous, or they, what they do. I'm getting to sit at their feet and learn from them. I'm getting to ask the questions that I have. I'm a little selfish in my podcast. Like, I have questions, right? I want to get them answered, so who better to ask than other filmmakers? And I have a platform to do it, so I'm going to do it. And hopefully there are other people out there who have the same questions. So it's a real privilege. And the craziest thing, man, has just been like getting to go full circle with Dawn of the Dead. I mean, I've interviewed not only Scott Reiniger, I interviewed Jeannie Jeffries recently, who was a zombie and did makeup. I interviewed a guy named Mike Ankis. He was a featured zombie. He helped rip apart Tasso Stavrakis in Day of the Dead, So, and he has all these stories about being on set. He was friends with Tom Savini for years. So there's all these really cool stories about hanging out with Tom and doing things with Tom. And, so I'm getting to get this sort of insider access to things, and it's just really cool, man. I don't know if I answered your question, by the way. I think I left the question a while ago. Do you want to ask me again? Did I answer it?
You did.
Okay.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because a while back, I got to talk to Joe Alves, and Joe directed Jaws 2, and he created the shark that was used in Jaws, and he created the scenery for Escape from New York and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He designed the spaceship. And I don't know if you've ever spoken to him, but he's probably one of the most modest, humble people that you ever speak to.
Yeah.
And like, he talks about it like, oh yeah, it was just something I did. And at the end, I was like, well, you designed something that scared the crap out of people for years.
I think in his mind, he probably still has the feeling he had about it in 1973 or whenever it was. They just did what they did. They did what they could with what they had, and they did the best they could. And it was like, they didn't know that it was going to be the sensation it was.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
I think in his mind, that's still how he sees it. It's like, okay, well, I'm just making this low budget shark movie, or I don't remember how was Jaws considered low budget? I don't know, but it's interesting. These people that do these iconic things, they tend to be very humble about it. They're not, about it, and I think it's just because they didn't know. I mean, like when I talked to Gene, when I talked to Scott, I've met Ken Foree before. I mean, you talk to these people at the time, they didn't know they were doing something that 40 years later. Genie especially was really interesting. Well, no, Scott was the same way. It's like Scott expressed how, and I'm not quoting him on this. I'm just kind of giving the idea of what he said. For him, it's like to talk to these people. He meets so many fans that weren't even alive when the movie was made.
Right.
But to this day, they're in love with this film. The horror community, there's something really special about the horror community. And the actors see it. The actresses see it. They know it's this big community. It's this big family. Mm-hmm. And it's such a unique thing. And I think especially what it's become today with the conventions and the signings and things like that, I think there's something really unique and special about it. And it's a community you can really belong to. There's so many people out there who don't feel like they fit in or belong. The horror community's there, man. They'll accept you open arms. Mm-hmm. And you can geek out of stuff. You can wear costumes and hats and, color your hair whatever color you want. Nobody cares. You can be you and you're in good company. It's really cool.
You get a little bit of a leeway there.
Yeah, exactly. Because I've been asked like why I think the horror community. I want to say I've been asked that more than once. What is it about the horror community that's so special? Why is it? And I think it's because it's and I always feel kind of weird when I say this because I feel like people are going to interpret it as me making fun of people, and I'm not. But I'm stating a fact. The horror community, for the most part, is made up of people who weren't popular in high school. They weren't necessarily the most sociable people. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are introverts. It's made up of like the outcasts, the people who weren't popular in school. It's those people, and not all of them are that way. I mean, there's plenty of people that are on the other side of the bench, so to speak. But it's made up of those people, man. And now they suddenly have this community where they can be who they are unapologetically.
Right.
And it's okay. And they've never felt that way before. And it's just created this really amazing, welcoming place, And it's really cool. It's cool to see. And I just think it's neat that the actors and actresses really see that and they enjoy it, and that's why they do these conventions, because they know that these people, it makes their year, it can make their life to meet their hero,
right. Yeah, and I guess with getting involved with horror, you probably adopt the mindset that you're looking at the world in another way when you're creating this kind of movie. That these monsters do exist and that these people can get terrorized. And I guess when you run with that, anybody else that you meet along who likes what you're doing, they're getting what you're doing. It's
interesting how many people get involved in horror that aren't horror people. I got to interview Alan Troutman, who was Tarman in Return of the Living Dead, right? Mm-hmm. That was the first joint interview I did I had a co-host and my friend Angel Bradford. She's an actress. And I told her, I said, Angel, one of the questions we had on our list of questions we wanted to ask him, one of the questions we had was like, fast zombies, slow zombies, where do you fall in that debate? I said, this question we may not ask him because I don't know for sure if he's actually a horror fan. I just kind of had this feeling like, there's a possibility he might not be a horror fan. And my intuition was correct. He is not a horror guy. He's a theater guy. He's been a puppeteer. Like he did that movie because it was a job, right? He just needed a job, and he did an amazing job at it. But he's worked for, he joined the Muppet Company when Jim Henson was still alive. It was like right at the tail end. It was right before Jim died is when he started doing the Muppet stuff. But Alan's not a horror guy; he's a theater guy. Mark Scheffler, who he's super famous for being a Last House on the Left. He's a comedian. He's not a horror guy,
right?
Susan Lanier, again, famous for horror stuff. She's not really a horror person, so many of these people are not horror people, or maybe they're horror people, but they're just so opposite of what they play. So, example, that's Tony Todd. Mm-hmm. When I met Tony, he's one of the nicest people. I have so much respect for that man. I love Tony Todd, man. He's so nice. He loves his fans. He follows his fans on Twitter. He interacts. He knew me by name when I met him because he and I had interacted on Twitter a lot. So he actually knew me by name. I got in line, and got up to meet him, and he's like, Bryan, right? And we talked. And he had a really long line. He was one of the longest lines at the convention. He didn't rush a single person off, including me. He literally spent as much time as it took with each person. Didn't feel rushed. Hugs. Just an amazing guy. very cultured, very kind, just the salt of the earth human being. Man, these characters he plays are so menacing sometimes. Like you watch Sushi Girl or you watch The Rock, he plays these really evil characters. He is an Oscar worthy actor. Like I would love to do a movie that would win him an Oscar because he deserves one. I met Bill Moseley. My gosh, you watch Bill Moseley in Rob Zombie's films, that Otis character he plays. Mm-hmm. How terrifying is that guy? Right. That is a terrifying character. But you meet Bill, he's just a regular guy. Just a regular guy. Nice guy. Just a regular dude. I talked to him and, I was telling him that, he and my stepdad have the same name. He's like, oh, there's another Bill Moseley. I'm like, yeah, he's just a nice guy, but he gets into this Otis character and he's terrifying. That's one of the most terrifying villains I've ever seen in a film is Otis. It's just, I don't know. It's interesting. I'm really fascinated by, and who was it I asked this? It was, I think it was Larry Hankin. I asked this question. One of the things I'm fascinated by with what these people do is like, how do they find that character when they're the complete and total opposite human being? Mm-hmm. And I asked Larry about that. And, for whatever reason right now, I'm drawing a blank on what he said. I remember what he said now. He was talking about like there's sort of a conscious and subconscious to it, and it's like, I'm a guitar player and he's like, you're a guitar player. So like, when you're playing the guitar, you're not sitting there looking at the neck and thinking about the notes. Like you have to let the muscle memory take over. And that's what you do with these characters. You just let kind of the muscle memory take over. You let yourself kind of become a little bit of a different person, Mm-hmm. And every actor has their own way of doing it. Some method act and they just become the character. Some people, they're able to just turn it off and on. And so I don't know. I'm not an actor at the end of the day. I've not been professionally trained. I just, when I act, I put a little bit of myself in those characters, and I actually do that in my writing as well. In Blood Repentance, there's, I haven't filmed these scenes yet, and I'm really excited because there's Scott's character and Donovan's character. They have this very special, it's almost like a big brother, little brother kind of dynamic between them, and Donovan's character is very much a smart aleck, sarcastic, like he's a jerk, and just really is just getting at Scott, just a kind of like just, and what's funny is there's actually a real history between them in real life. So I'm really excited to watch that dynamic happen on camera. And so we joke that Scott's going to like get out all of his years of resentment at Donovan, which there's not any, but like, but what I thought was fascinating is how easy it was for me to write this character like that. And Dom's like, he's like, well, dude, that's you. Like, you can absolutely be this way, man. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's not good. Like, so I think I put a little bit of myself in my characters when I write. There's a little piece of my personality in each of them. Mm-hmm. And it's fun. It's fun to do that, but it's scary when you can create somebody like Brad. That's the character's name. It's bad when you can easily create Brad. And what's funny is, Jim, I'm sitting here writing this and I have Scott's and I'm watching this play in my head as I'm writing, right? So like, Scott will say something and then I immediately hear Brad's like witty remark. Just immediately hear it. I'm like, so I start typing it. I'm like, this, it's not good how easy this is. I can absolutely be this guy, but I choose not to be because I want to be a nice person. But yeah, I'm that guy. I put a little bit of myself in the character. Not only the characters are right, but there's a little bit of my personality in my characters I portray as well, and I wonder if it's possible to act and not to have that. I don't know. Like that's a question I have. Like I would love to ask Tony that question. Like even like your most vile character you play, if you look deep down inside, is there a piece of that in you? Because everybody has things about themselves they don't like, right? Like, is there even like a modicum? Like where does that come from? Like how can you play something so evil and not be that way? Like it's bizarre to me. It's incredible that they can do that. I just don't know. And in Tony's case, I would say absolutely not. There's not, I would say there's not an ounce of these characters in him because, you meet genuine people and they're genuine, and he's just a genuinely nice guy. But so my question stands: like, where do these characters come from, man? How do you do it? I don't know. I don't know. And and if I get the opportunity to meet him again and talk to him, I'm going to absolutely ask him that question because I want to know. I really do.
So when you're not making movies or working on your podcast, are there other podcasts that you like to listen to?
Yes. I've been thinking about that. The one I've been listening to lately is Eli Roth's History of Horror. really good stuff, man. One of my favorites is actually the interview with Bruce Campbell. I listened to that one recently. And he really talks a lot about just what went on behind the scenes and in Evil Dead and some of the mishaps. And I found it fascinating. Sam Raimi, he said that Sam, and actually I have a copy of it somewhere. He said Sam's one of the only directors he knows that actually has a copy of the American Society of Cinematographers manual and read it. Like he actually read that. It's a thick, and they release an edition of it every so often. I have a copy, but I don't know what it is though. But it's a really, really thick manual that goes over everything, lenses and film, and there's a new version just came out, but it's expensive. I want to get it, but it's expensive. It's like $100 or something. But he talked about all the crazy stuff Sam did with, like shooting like frame at a time. It's like, okay, start, stop. Okay, now move. Start, stop, now move. Like, I mean, taking hours to film like one scene kind of thing. Like, or he's like, you know what, let's film in 27 frames per second this time. And, instead of 24 and, for those of you out there who don't know, so the standard for shooting film to give it that cinematic look, you shoot 24 frames per second and then your shutter speed is either 1/48 or 1/50. My camera won't do 48, so I have to set the speed to 50. That affects your motion blur and the amount of light that comes in. So to give a film, don't just take your camera and just start shooting. It's gonna look like a home movie if you do that. To make it look like an actual film, you need to shoot 24 frames per second. I think it's called the 180 rule, but it says that your shutter speed should be double your frame rate. So if you shoot in 30 frames per second, your shutter speed needs to be 60. If you shoot in 60 frames per second, your shutter speed needs to be 120. It's like you need to follow that rule. But 24 frames with a 48 shutter speed, that's the standard. But Sam was like doing Evil Dead, man, just breaking that convention. He's like, oh, let's shoot in like 27 frames this time, and like just talking about all the crazy stuff he was doing. And I respect that. I love that about him. Mm-hmm. Let's see. He did an interview with Jeffrey Combs that was really good too. Like Jeffrey was talking about on Reanimator. They actually had, they did like fluorescent. So in the morgue scenes, the lighting was the fluorescent lights to give it like this, like what he said, this antiseptic look, So really, I've really been enjoying that podcast. Another one I listened to is called Darknet Diaries. And I've done IT for a number of years. So I still have somewhat of a fascination with it. So Darknet Diaries is cool because he talks about the cybersecurity side of things. He talks about, he'll interview, my favorites are when he interviews pen testers. These are guys and women that get paid by companies to break in, infiltrate their network, steal things. They're testing the security. It's called pen testing. That's actually why I was in school for cybersecurity. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do pen testing. Really enjoyed that. There's another one called Night of the Horrorphile that's really good. I'll listen to random stuff. Let's say I want to hear an interview with Stephen King. I'll just search for, I'll pull up, Pocket Cast or Apple Podcast. And I'll just search for, Stephen King and then find, I'll just queue up a bunch of interviews with him. Another one of my favorites is Mick Garris's Mortem podcast. That's really good. He interviews actors and directors, and man, that's good stuff. That's like the grandfather. I would love to interview Mick Garris. Like, I mean, he's like the grandfather of the horror interview. I mean, he was doing this back in in fact, I saw an interview he did with, it was Stephen King, George Romero, John Carpenter, and David Cronenberg, and John Landis. Yeah, John Landis was in it as well. And it was, it was in 84, I think, or 83 or 84, because The Thing was just about to come out. It wasn't out just yet. And David Cronenberg was talking about how excited he was to see it, and so was John Landis. And so I really, really enjoyed that one as well a lot.
And we have a portion of the show, and it's called Shameless Self-Promotion.
Shameless Self-Promotion.
And this is where you can let everybody know how they can get in touch with you or find out about your show.
Yeah. So my show's called The Other Interview Show. It's it's still fairly, I've got a lot of content queued up. It's just a matter of getting edited and getting out there, but it's growing. We're getting close to 3,000 downloads. Got some really cool stuff coming out. You can find it on every major podcast platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, pick one. It's out there. My company is called Dawn Journey Productions. We're doing stuff. I'm trying to grow it. My goal with it, I want to help people make movies, and I want to create a safe environment for them to make movies. I want to be like, if somebody wants to be a filmmaker, if they have a screenplay ready, I want to be the first person they think of to call. And I want to have a studio space, equipment. I want to have everything they need to make their movie. I want to sit down with them, go over their screenplay. I want to assign them a mentor director who's going to be their assistant director in the project. And they're going to be available by phone. Like this person is going to walk through the process, teach the ropes, because this person's an experienced filmmaker themselves. And I want to walk them through making a movie A to Z. And not only a movie, but a good movie. I want quality filmmaking to be, filmmaking is more accessible, but quality filmmaking isn't quite there yet. You still need a little bit of a budget to do it. You need, sound is going to be your biggest challenge. You need good sound. So I want to make quality filmmaking available to people. That's my ultimate goal with Dawn Journey Productions. I'm very active on Facebook. Just look for Bryan Parkerson. I've got a giant beard. Look for a guy with a giant beard. That's me. I'm active on Twitter. I've got a Dawn Journey Productions Twitter page, and I've got a Dawn Journey Productions Instagram and a Facebook page as well. But honestly, if people really want to interact with me, Facebook's the place to find me. If you do message me, I ask that you send me like a complete message. Don't start out just hello and wait for me to respond, because that's the same thing hackers do. So I might just block you. And I don't want to block people that really want to genuinely talk to me. So, if you do send me a message, like, send me like a complete, like, hey, I got a question, and ask me the question. So that way I know that you're a real person.
All right. So his name is Bryan Parkerson. He is the host of the Other Interview Show. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and for all the pointers for our aspiring directors out there.
Yeah. Listen, I'm going to say something that Joe Bob Briggs said. One of the things that really motivated me to become a filmmaker, there's a monologue he did called Keep Rolling. And it was something he did on the last drive-in. And it's 5 minutes and 47 seconds long. And if that doesn't motivate you to make movies, nothing will. But one of the points I'm going to leave you with that he said that there is no such thing as an aspiring filmmaker. He said, you are a filmmaker, and you have to start thinking that way. Whether, you're a mechanic or a doctor, whatever, it doesn't matter. That's not what you are. You're a filmmaker. You're a screenwriter. He said, if you have 10 minutes a day to work on your screenplay, you work on your screenplay 10 minutes a day. You're a filmmaker. So that's the message I want to leave with people. Every time I hear somebody say aspiring filmmaker, I'm like, nope, that's not a real thing. You're a filmmaker. The only thing standing in your way is you. Just get out there and do it. John Carpenter will tell you the same thing. He says, just get out there with the camera and do something. And I promise you, the minute you make that momentum, people will see your passion, and they'll see what you're doing, and they will follow. Join. If somebody asks me, like, how do you become a filmmaker? Here's what I would tell you to do. Number one, start a podcast, because it's a fantastic networking tool. Number two, find your local film community on Facebook. Facebook is a fantastic networking tool. Get involved with your local film community on Facebook. Post, introduce yourself. Tell them you're a new filmmaker and you're excited. Tell them about the project you want to do, and people will find you, man. And then just get out there and do it. Take behind the scenes photos, post them. Just get excited about film. And when people see that passion, they're gonna come. They're gonna follow. You're gonna before you know it, you're gonna have people sending you messages wanting to be in your film. And it's an amazing feeling to have that happen. But remain humble. That's the most important thing, is remain humble and be willing to serve.
Great words to wrap this up on, Bryan. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
Be a rebel. Follow the show at Sherpalution on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
Oh, I think that last noise might have been me. Sorry about that. So, did you get the 80s musical reference? She blinded me with podcasts. Podcasts about science. That's right. I sampled a whole bunch of scientific podcasts this week, and I feel so much smarter and so much confusion as well. I think the type of science podcast that you might enjoy probably depends on the level of science that you can understand. Now, we have featured science podcasts before and given some mention, some worthy ones, or just Nah Science, which unfortunately is not recording anymore, but catch the back episodes with Nick and Lauren. They were fun guests, and really enjoyed having them on the show. And also Ask a Spaceman with Dr. Paul Sutter, who, by the way, recently got married. Congratulations, Dr. Sutter. Super nice guest, and we learned so much on that show. What are some other really cool science podcasts? Well, we can't forget Star Talk Radio with Neil deGrasse Tyson. He hasn't been on the show, but he's more than welcome to come on the show if he'd like. Come on down, Dr. Tyson. And also Daniel and Jorge Explain the Universe. So lots of scientific stuff out there. So what was I saying? Yes, different levels of science. So if you really know a lot about science and you're comfortable with a lot of different topics in a scientific discussion, you want to check out some of these first. So we have Sci Tangents, The Naked Scientists, which also has several other sub-podcasts where they field questions from listeners as well. It is kind of advanced. They don't really break it down very simply, but it's understandable, though. I'll give you that much. And also from the BBC, there is The Infinite Monkey Cage, and also Inside Science. A lot of scientific discussion going on there. If you want to be up on the science world, these are the podcasts you definitely want to check out. Now, somewhere in the middle are Sci-Fry and Tiny Matters. And Tiny Matters was interesting. It was talking about regeneration, as in regenerating body parts. Think I can grow another brain? I doubt it, Sherpa. And if you are a science beginner like me and you like things very simple, we got a couple of stuff for you. We have Shortwave, and that is from NPR. Science Versus, which was really interesting. This is where they take on a subject and maybe do some scientific experiments. The one that I listened to was about hydration, and it was really very entertaining and educational as well. I really enjoyed it. And we can't forget The Curious Cases of Rutherford and Fry. And they are two scientists who talk about a lot of different things. And they talked about your skin. And it was really interesting as well. But one of my favorites that I listened to out of these 10 was Ologies by Ali Ward. And it's a different ology, a different study of science each week. And the one that I listened to was about squid. And she got to talk to this lady called the Squid Lady. And it was really also educational and entertaining as well. Fascinating stuff. And they talk about all sorts of different things, not just in the animal world, but in the plant world, things in outer space, all sorts of ologies that are out there. So check that one out, and don't be afraid to check out all those other ones. And speaking of checking things out, if there's a podcast that you would like me to sample, you can message me on social media, Sherpalution, of course. And if I have not yet sampled your show, and I do mention it on the episode, I will mention your name as well, and you could be heard by millions of listeners. Well, I don't know, maybe, would you believe, 5 or 6? But yes, I will do that for you because it's absolutely free. You don't have to pay a special fee to have that happen. I will mention your name, and you know what? I feel so scientific. I think my theory is that we will now head into the outro. A very special thanks to Mr. Bryan Parkerson of The Other Interview Show for coming on by, and a very special thanks to all of you for listening. And if you want to say thanks to me, you know what you could do? Head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave me a lovely review so that everyone in Podcastia can hear about the Sherpalution and they can get involved too. Doesn't cost you anything either. Keep that in mind. And speaking of Sherpalution, did I speak? Yeah, I did. Speaking of Sherpalution, you can listen to the show on my website, Sherpalution.com. There's all sorts of fun stuff going on over there. And Sherpalution is also an important word. Why? You know why, Rebels. If you'd like to follow me on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and the Twitter. I'm there all the time, keeping you guys informed of what's going down here at the Sherpa Chalet. So thank you so much for coming on by, and next week we will be in the Sherpa screening room with actor, comedian, writer, Mr. Mark Scheffler. Sound familiar? He was from Last House on the Left. We're out of here, folks. Mr. Bruce, let's get on out of here. And until then, folks, viva la Sherpalution.
Thanks for listening to Too Many Podcasts. Please disperse. You can go home now. I said you can go home now. Viva la Sherpalution. Viva la Sherpalution. Oh. Yeah, I'll come back now, you hear?